Hello, this is Steve Kubby. I'd like to welcome you to Kubby TV. And today we have a very special guest, Steph Sherer, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access. And today we're going to throw some tough questions at Steph. In fact, we're going to be throwing tough questions at her for the next 4 days. Now, nobody can question that Steph Sherer is the leading female spokesperson nationally for cannabis reform. Her organization claims 30,000 members and 40 affiliates in 40 states. Steph has been passionate, compelling, and effective spokesperson, and at the same time, there's been some rather critical comments made about her and ASA. So today, and for the next 4 days, we're going to put it all on the line. We're going to ask the tough questions. We're going to give Steph an opportunity to answer the tough questions. And hopefully when we're done with this process, we'll all be a little smarter and a little more aware of how we all work together and how we can work together to create unity within the community. So let's not hesitate any further. Let's jump right into it with Steph Sherer. Steph, welcome to Kubby TV. Thank you so much for coming by and making an appearance with us. And if you don't mind, the time has come to ask you some tough questions. I-502 seems to be headed for a disaster. Medical marijuana patient rights are being put on the line, and there is the ongoing issue of I-502 authorizing the automatic imposition of felony driving under the influence of a drug if you have 5 billionths of a gram of marijuana metabolite in your system. So, Steph, why would ASA support such a terrible law?
Americans for Safe Access had nothing to do with 502. Absolutely nothing to do with 502. We had conversations with ACLU and others that were drafting 502 to make sure that patients in the medical cannabis program would not be harmed. And that was the only thing that our conversations with the organizers of 502 were concerns specifically about DUID issues that were in that bill that we did not agree with. And we were very vocal about that.
Now, Steph, as you know, nearly all of the voter initiatives and legislative actions currently underway, either for medical marijuana or so-called legalization, require mandatory registration of people who sell or produce cannabis. Now, this is a clear violation of our Fifth Amendment right. This was covered actually by the Supreme Court in the Leary case, and the state does not have the right to compel us to provide information that can later be used against us, particularly when any marijuana production or sales is a direct violation of federal law. So, in addition to that, we have this onerous Second Amendment infringement by I-502 and other bills before legislatures that make it an additional crime if you violate the new state marijuana laws and you're in possession of a gun or ammunition. And then, of course, there's the violation of our Eighth Amendment right, cruel and unusual punishment, when the state comes in with child protective services and literally kidnaps kids to compel patients to stop using medical marijuana. These are all serious issues, serious violations of our constitutional rights. And I'd like to know where you and ASA stand on these key issues.
The recommendations that have just come out from the working group in Washington, I think are an alarm bell. This isn't law yet, but this is a draft of the recommendations that we know that the 502 working group are going to give to the legislature, and they're they're quite horrible. They're really focusing on looking at this plant from the perspective of tax revenue. And the voters here in Washington, when they voted for the medical cannabis program in '98, they were never talking about revenue, right? There was no intent to bring money into the state of Washington off the backs of patients. And what has happened here in Washington state, I believe, is that during the campaign for 502, the voters were promised $215 million from tax revenue. Right? That's what they were promised. And the 502 working group, part of their job was to figure out how to get that $215 million. They hired consultants to come in, and what they found was that the illicit market was going to make a challenge of being able to really bring in that revenue because of the ridiculous taxation structure that they've created. And they also found that that people that were abusing the medical cannabis program would also be cutting into the taxation. And then some really dangerous things started happening. Officials in Washington started talking about the 90 to 95% of people in the medical cannabis program as being fraudulent. And when I've asked where the hell that number came from, the only thing I can hear is that the only science behind it is that it came out of Mark Kleiman's ass, and that really is the most scientific answer that I've heard from any elected official. And so, as this working group is looking again at how are they going to find this $215 million, even though they see the illicit market as being the biggest problem, they see patients as low-hanging fruit. And so these recommendations are really from the perspective of how do we get money. The issue of registration for patients is probably one of the most controversial and heated discussions that I'm a part of in every medical cannabis state, every one. And what's interesting about these new laws, anytime there's a new law that is changing the way that all of departments, everybody deals with a substance, is a challenge. And I think one of the most unique things about medical cannabis for me, like anything I've ever worked on in my life, is that you're really creating something completely new, right? With something that is very old, right? So prohibition of marijuana has been around for a long time. All state agencies know how to deal with that substance from that perspective, right? And then you come in and you say, but we're going to create an exception for this group of people. Well, now here in Washington, we have even another sort of newness that we're adding to the table, which is that it's legal for anyone to have, right? So now it's even a different conversation, and I don't know what the answer is going to be. I think that a lot of work that we've done as Americans for Safe Access is try to bring all those points that you just made about the various violations that registries can bring. We definitely have fought in court to try to protect patients' rights and their identity. And, as an organization, what we see is that we want patients to be treated just like any other American, right? The fact that this is the medication you need should not alter your rights in any way. That is what we believe. And that being said, that's the perspective that I walk into any legislator's office with, any regulator's office. That's my perspective, always, right? But I'm walking into the room with law enforcement, state legislators that all have their perspective, right? And I've heard some pretty interesting dialogues of trying to figure out, and some of how this works. Some of the individuals at the table are looking at ways that they can circumvent these laws and harass patients, absolutely. But there are also people that are just trying to figure it out. And for someone who is a legislator or a bureaucrat, works in an agency, those people really believe in government, right? They really believe that laws help us as a society live better together, right? That's their philosophy. And I know that it's really easy to call them politicians and to see the ugliness of our political system. But the truth is that to be an elected official, you are looking at how the citizens in an area are going to live, and you have to take care of everything from what happens when they go to the restroom, what happens to the sewer, right? Like all of that. You have to look at what happens to when their pets use the restroom on sidewalks, right? And parking, where they're going to park, what the air that they breathe. And that's what those politicians look at every day, and and they see good in their systems, right? And so when I think that a lot of the registry conversations have really come from bureaucrats saying, well, someone has a prescription and that's a contract, and a police officer knows that they are supposed to have that prescription, right? That's sort of the path that they're looking for solutions, are really in a good space. But we know, after watching this unfold around the country, that that's not always what happens. And so my advice for anyone who's working on this and moving forward is that is to always keep in mind that we should not be treated like anyone else in this country. And that's what I ask politicians, and I ask police that I meet to really look at the lives of patients as individuals, of how these laws are going to affect their life, versus looking at us mashed into society. And I am seeing some positive innovation in registries and departments of public health really trying to figure this out. But of course, I think that the registry for Washington is a completely different conversation, because now you have a situation where you're saying that people who want to get high to have fun should have more rights than cancer patients. And I don't think that that's what the voters of Washington were thinking when they passed 502.
Well, this has been interview one of a four-part interview with Steph Sherer, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access. Join us tomorrow for part two of our interview with Steph. And in the meantime, have a great 215 day.
The weight so heavy where I stand.